protects dependent adults. So if someone's not 65 or older, it's good to screen someone, see whether they're a dependent adult and entitled to those protections in the elder abuse law. So a dependent adult is a person who is 18 years or older with physical or mental limitations that restrict his or her ability to carry out normal activities or protect his or her rights. And so this is a functional test, not linked to any particular diagnosis. So it can be range from mental health problems to physical disabilities, intellectual disabilities. It's pretty open to interpretation, but it's mainly about whether someone needs help with day-to-day activities. So let's think about what makes our elders and dependent adults vulnerable to abuse. Can anyone think of anything?
Should I respond verbally or in the chat? I'm sorry.
Oh, you could say it verbally if you could think of anything.
I would. Well, one thing I was going to say is their disability, also their age.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. There's a range of factors. Disability is a huge one. Loneliness, fear. A lot of seniors are embarrassed to speak up. If you're isolated, it can make you more receptive to having abusive people in your life. Sometimes seniors are scared of having no one to care for them, and so they might put up with an abusive caregiver, figuring that an abusive caregiver or family member is better than no one to take care of them. If a senior is isolated enough by an abuser, they might start identifying with the abuser and have trouble even recognizing that abuse is happening. So there's a lot of factors that make someone vulnerable.
I was thinking about language barrier. So a lot of, people don't speak English or Spanish or any other languages.
Mm-hmm. Definitely, language is a risk factor, and it can make it harder for people to seek help if they're being abused, if they don't speak English. So who experiences elder abuse? People across all socioeconomic groups, cultures, races. Immigrants, non-immigrants experience abuse. Women are more likely to be affected. And then, like we mentioned, disabilities make someone vulnerable to elder abuse, and elders who lack capacity, for instance, and have dementia, are more vulnerable. In almost 60% of elder abuse and neglect incidents, the abuser is a family member. I see that myself in my work. Most of the time, the abuser is an adult child or maybe a grandchild, a spouse, or some other relative. And so there are a number of different types of elder abuse. A lot of people sometimes assume that it's just physical abuse. And that is one type, but there are many other types. So can anyone think of any other types of elder abuse? You can just call it out.
Verbal.
Definitely.
Financial.
Yes, that's a big one.
Emotional.
Mental abuse.
Yep, these are all definitely different types of abuse. And so, like I mentioned, one type of elder abuse is physical abuse, and this can mean different things. Physical abuse can include hitting or pushing someone. It can also include using an inappropriate restraint on a senior, for instance, strapping someone to a bed. It includes deprivation of food or water. And then it also includes misuse of medication. And this can be over medicating someone or administering drugs. for a purpose not authorized by a physician. So for instance, if someone has dementia or mental health problems and they're really acting up and just hard to deal with for the caregiver, sometimes caregivers will give them powerful drugs just to sedate the person and make it easier to care for that person. And that is a form of physical abuse. Another type of abuse is sexual abuse, and this is basically any non-consensual sexual activity. There's mental or emotional abuse, and this includes harassment, intimidation that causes emotional distress or fear. And this is a very common one, and it includes name calling, threats to put in a home or put someone in a home, that kind of thing. Another form of abuse is deprivation by a care custodian or caregiver of services or things that are needed to avoid harm or suffering. And this can mean, for instance, not taking someone to see the doctor if they're seriously ill, or not providing clothing for a person. Another form of elder abuse is neglect or abandonment. And then there's kind of a catch-all form of abuse. That's just any other treatment that results in physical harm, pain, or suffering. Another type of abuse is isolation. And with this, you see the systemic exclusion of all outside contact. So the elder is isolated from family, friends, and their normal social life. The elder can be made to distrust others and trust only the abuser. Some warning signs of this can be if someone's contact with others is being restricted or limited, if it seems like the elder can't speak freely, if there's a lack of contact with others.
We have somebody just filling out their information for donations that they just
Can we
gave us.
please mute if you're not
Or
speaking? So is another form of isolation is if the elder or dependent adult has a lack of contact with others without the caregiver being present. So if the elder is not even able to meet a friend without the caregiver being there, that's a warning sign of abuse.
Emily, I don't know if you can share your screen again.
Oh.
I tried to mute everyone and I may have compromised stuff.
It says I am screen sharing.
We can still see it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So another really important form of elder abuse is financial abuse. And this is actually the most common form of abuse reported to Adult Protective Services after self-neglect. And financial abuse happens when a person takes the property of an elder or dependent adult for a wrongful use or with intent to defraud, or if someone helps in any of this, if the person, the abuser, knew or should have known that this conduct, so their behavior is likely to be harmful to the elder or dependent adult. Financial abuse can be a tricky one because it, in some sense, comes down to what is the intent of the abuser, which can be a little hard to discern. And so examples of financial abuse can include if an adult child takes their mom's checkbook without the mom's permission, and the child starts writing checks to themselves out of mom's checkbook and forging mom's signature. That's something that I've seen actually in one of my cases. That's a pretty classic form of financial abuse. Other forms of financial abuse can include just stealing a senior's possessions, accessing a senior's bank account. If a senior gives a caregiver the senior's credit card to go buy groceries for the senior, and the caregiver ends up buying not just groceries, but cigarettes and other things for the caregiver that the elder didn't authorize, that can be another form of financial abuse. And so let's talk about who are the abusers. Like I mentioned, family members are very often the abusers. Other abusers can be caregivers, people who are friends, who kind of insert themselves into the senior's life. Oftentimes, these new friends want to try to get money or property from the senior. Unfortunately, lawyers and financial advisors also commit elder abuse. And then another very common form of abuser are strangers and scam artists. And scams are a form of financial abuse. So it's important for our seniors to know the signs of scams. Anytime there's pressure to the senior or person to pay today or the offer ends, that's suspicious. Rarely is there a good reason why someone has to pay money immediately and why they can't think about it for a few days. Anytime someone makes threats that you'll be arrested if you don't pay, or you'll go to jail if you don't pay. Whenever someone asks for payment via wire transfer or gift cards, and sometimes now also via cryptocurrency, this can be a sign of a scam. These forms of payment are hard to trace, and it's hard to recover the money, or almost impossible to recover the money. And so scammers like these forms of payment. If names or emails are slightly changed or things look off, that's something to make you suspicious. And then also, just if something feels off, trust your gut and stop dealing with the person you're dealing with. And with scams, a restraining order generally is not going to help someone recover, and prevention is the best weapon against scams, for sure. So let's talk about what we can do for seniors who are experiencing abuse. One tool is restraining orders, and there are different types of restraining orders. There are elder abuse restraining orders, then there's civil harassment and domestic violence restraining orders. And we're going to talk more about elder abuse restraining orders later on. Other options for people, because a restraining order is not always the best option. Other options include calling 911, and if possible, just cutting off contact with the other party. I know that seems obvious to us maybe, but sometimes to the seniors we work with, it's not so obvious. And just cutting off contact with an abuser can really help. So let's talk more now about elder abuse restraining orders. And these are for elders who are 65 and older or dependent adults. So not everybody that we work with might qualify for these types of restraining orders. And so like I mentioned, there are specific eligibility requirements for these elder abuse restraining orders, or EAROs. And the purpose of these restraining orders is to protect one individual from another. And their purpose is really to prevent future abuse. They're not about remedying past abuse. And so what's required to get one of these restraining orders? Well, first, the person who wants the restraining order, this person's known as the petitioner, they have to tell the court that, usually through a written statement, or we call it a declaration, that the person they want restrained, known as the respondent, has committed an act or acts of elder abuse. So what this really is the person who's being abused, the petitioner, can write out a narrative of what's been going on, what the abuse is, and what's been happening. And that kind of can show the judge why the restraining order is necessary and why the person should get a restraining order. And then you can get an initial temporary restraining order without notice to the abusive person who you want restrained. And the petitioner, in a restraining order case, they're under penalty of perjury. And so it's good to get all the facts out in your initial application so the judge has this in front of them. And so I'm going to go over quickly the restraining order procedure in Contra Costa County. I imagine it's similar in other counties. There's some forms you fill out that you submit to the court, and then the The court will look them over and set a hearing date. And this hearing date is where you go before, where the petitioner goes before a judge, and the judge decides, should this person get the restraining order or not? Another step in the process is you have to have the respondent, that's the abuser, given a copy of all the documents that the petitioner files. So you have to make sure that you can find the abuser, or you can't get a restraining order. And then, like I mentioned, the person who's being abused has to appear at a hearing where the judge decides what should happen. And if you're able to get a final restraining order from the judge, then you have to also make sure that the abuser is given a copy of this final restraining order. So there are a lot of steps in the restraining order process. And then, so the forms that you have to fill out, this is statewide. There's just 3 forms, the EA 100, EA 109, and EA 110. And these are all available on the California court's website. Oftentimes, courts also can give out paper copies to people. And so who can apply for an elder abuse restraining order? It can be the elder or the dependent adult themselves. It can also be a guardian or conservator if the person who needs protection is conserved. It can be an attorney in fact. And so if, say, an elder has set up a power of attorney and authorized someone to engage in litigation, then the person who's authorized to do this is called the attorney in fact, and they can apply for a restraining order on behalf of the elder. Adult Protective Services can, with some rules, apply for an elder abuse restraining order. And then there's others can do it with legal authorization, but these are the most common ones on the screen. And so what can a restraining order do for seniors or dependent adults? So a big one is you can get a stay away order. And with this order, the restrained party, that's the abuser, is ordered not to come within a certain distance of, it can be the elder or the dependent adult. You can add other protected parties such as the elder's spouse or caregiver. You can add the elder's home, the elder's job or workplace, elder's vehicle, or any other locations where the protected person, the elder, often goes, like a place of worship. Another available order is a move-out order. And with this order, the abusive person is ordered to move out of the home where the elder lives. And so, like I mentioned, you can get a temporary restraining order to protect you initially after you file your paperwork. And to get the move out order in this temporary restraining order, the elder has to have a right to possession of the premises. The party to be excluded, so the abuser, has to have assaulted or threatened to assault the petitioner or some other family member or household member. So what this means is that there has to have been some kind of physical violence generally, and you have to show that physical or emotional harm would result to the elder or dependent adult if this person isn't forced to move out right away. So some points on this. When we talk about the elder's right to possession of the property, this just means that to get a move out order, the elder must have an equal or greater right to live in the home or the apartment. And so the title to the home or on the lease to the residence, it can't be in the name of the respondent or the abuser only, or the abuser and a third party. And I should note that physical abuse or threat of physical abuse aren't required to get a move out order after you've had your hearing. So at the hearing, a judge can order someone to move out if it's just been verbal abuse or emotional abuse, for instance. So for example, if someone suffered financial abuse only, they might not get the move out order in their temporary restraining order, so they wouldn't get it right away. But once they have their hearing and see the judge, then the judge can order the person to move out. And so a little more about move out orders, because they're a little complicated. Restraining orders shouldn't just be thought of as an alternative tool for getting an eviction. Judges don't like this, and for some clients, they might be better off seeking an eviction instead of a restraining order. And the mere fact of another person's refusing to leave a senior's home or not paying rent, that doesn't by itself constitute abuse. And so moving on, other available orders in a restraining order are what we call personal conduct orders. And this can include an order basically that the abuser commit no abuse. And so the restrained party is ordered not to physically abuse, financially abuse, intimidate, molest, attack, etc. Basically, they're ordered not to bother the protected person at all or harm that person. You can also get an order that the abuser have no contact with the protected person. And so this is both indirect contact and direct contact. So the abuser can't even contact the protected person through a third party. All contact is banned. And then there's a catch-all in restraining orders. You can ask for any other orders that you think are needed to protect the petitioner from the abusive behavior. So just to recap, what can an elder abuse restraining order do? It can order the abuser to stay away from an elder's home, car, or other places the elder goes. You can get the conduct orders of no abuse and no contact. You can get a move out order where the abuser must move out of the elder's home. And then you can also protect animals belonging to the elder from abuse. Then there's some things that an elder abuse restraining order can't do. It can't order the abuser to seek mental health treatment or substance use treatment. There is a section on the elder abuse restraining order forms where you can ask that the abuser be ordered to undergo anger management training or counseling, but there isn't really a mechanism for enforcing this. So chances are, even if a judge orders someone to go to counseling, if the person doesn't want to go to counseling, it's probably not going to happen. An elder abuse restraining order can't really be used to order the abuser to pay money to the senior. So if the elder, it's money they want, then a restraining order is probably not the best option for this person. It also can't be used to recover an elder's assets. So for cases of financial abuse where an abuser has somehow taken title to an elder's home and the elder wants to get their home back, then a restraining order is maybe not the best option for this elder. An elder abuse restraining order also can't be used to send an abuser to jail or result in criminal charges being brought against the abuser. An abuser can go to jail if they violate a restraining order enough times and in a serious enough way, but a judge won't put an order in a restraining order that the person has to serve time. So I'm going to read a scenario that we can talk about. Lucia is 68 and lives with her husband who has dementia and her adult son. Lucia is a monolingual Spanish speaker. One day her son brings over a woman named Sharon who says she's homeless with 4 kids. Lucia agrees to let them stay for a couple weeks until they get back on their feet. However, they end up staying for months and they won't leave. Sharon uses drugs regularly and goes on tirades and yells at everyone in the house. Lucia's husband is very disturbed by Sharon's yelling. Lucia finds needles in the bathroom and cleans them up. Sharon leaves for days at a time and does not feed the kids often enough. Lucia pays for food for the children, even though she does not have enough for herself, and she gets behind on the rent. Sharon yells at Lucia, but Lucia does not always understand what she's saying because Lucia doesn't speak English. So Can Lucia file a restraining here? Can Lucia file a restraining order against Sharon? And what is the abuse here? What do you guys think?
I think it depends how bad is the yelling, right? Because I mean, if the yelling is an aggressive yelling, definitely we can see an emotional abuse. But if it is just random yelling, it's not something pleasant, but not necessarily might mean abuse. So maybe really here we're talking about an eviction, going through another kind of process. So I think, I know, it depends on the yelling, I guess.
Yeah, that's a good point. If the yelling is all the time and it's constant and it's every day, maybe that is a better case for a restraining order. It's more abusive. But if it's yelling very rarely, then maybe it's not as serious of a case of elder abuse.
Yeah, so maybe in this case, then yes, she needs to, if it's not, if it doesn't mean abuse, then I guess here is that these people are overstaying. So an eviction would be the right route, in my opinion.
We had another question about whether or not CFS needed to be contacted about the kids, or just understanding that process a little bit, because the minor children, how do they come into play?
That's a good question. So if Lucia was my client, I would probably advise her to file a report with Child Protective Services, because it does sound like a dangerous situation for the kids. Also, I have seen with restraining order cases, sometimes if a parent is leaving their children with the senior and the senior can't take care of the children, that actually can constitute elder abuse. And I had a case like that, and we ended up getting a restraining order, and the young mother had been leaving her son with my disabled elderly client. So that actually, you can argue that constitutes elder abuse. But yes, Child Protective Services should probably be called in this case. So what other services might we offer Lucia? Oh, yes, Jenny.
Emily, does that mean that Lucia would have to file 2 restraining orders, one against the son for allowing someone to stay there or not caring for them, or is it just against Sharon?
I would say she should probably apply for one against Sharon based on these facts. We don't really know enough about Lucia's relationship with her son to know if she should apply for a restraining order against her son. So it's possible that 2 restraining orders might be necessary here, but we don't know enough based on these facts. Can anyone think of some other services that we might advise Lucia to seek?
Maybe if she's having a hard time with food, trying to see what other public benefits she could get, or Meals on Wheels.
Yeah, definitely. That could be a good one for her. Moving on, if you have a client and you want to screen them for elder abuse, there are some questions that I think it's always important to ask. One question is, how old are you? Because the person's age will help you determine whether they qualify for an elder abuse restraining order or if they qualify for another type of restraining order. And different types of restraining orders can do different things. And not every type of restraining order can do everything. So it's important to know what type of restraining order someone qualifies for when you're going to advise them. I also ask, what is the relationship, your relationship to the abuser? This isn't so important for elder abuse restraining orders, but with domestic violence restraining orders, that's another type of restraining order. The relationship between the abuser and the other person is really important, because you qualify for a domestic violence restraining order based on this relationship. Also, the relationship to the abuser can help you determine what, if any, elder abuse is going on. For instance, if it's a caregiver and someone who they care for, that can help tell you maybe there's neglect going on here. I also ask, what's the most egregious abuse that's happening? Meaning basically, what's the worst thing the other person's done to you? And this kind of helps sets the stage and helps me get a sense of what's going on and how bad is it. And then I also think it's important to ask, what's the most recent thing the other person has done to you? Generally, judges are most interested in abuse that's happened within the past 3 months. You can certainly qualify for a restraining order based on any past abuse. It can even be abuse that happened 5 years ago. But if you're applying for a restraining order against someone who you haven't seen or heard from in years, the judge is probably going to wonder why the restraining order is even necessary, and maybe think that the restraining order is not necessary. So you want to focus on recent abuse when you apply for a restraining order. You also should ask the client, what are their goals? What do they want to achieve? Because like I said, different restraining orders can do different things. And so if the person's goal is to recover money that their caregiver stole, then a restraining order may not be appropriate. But if the person's goal is to get the abuser to stay away from them, then a restraining order could be a great option. So all of this will shape the advice that you give your client and help you determine whether a restraining order is even appropriate. And so there's some other legal remedies for elder abuse. You can always hire a private attorney to sue the person for elder abuse. And private attorneys have more ability to help get money back if there are assets available. So for financial abuse cases, I will often refer the client to a private attorney and advise the person that maybe suing the abuser and trying to recover some of that money is a good option for the senior. Private attorneys often can work on contingency, meaning the client doesn't have to pay up front and they only pay if they win. And a lot of clients that are low income, this might help them, because a lot of people can't afford private attorneys. And then if it's an eviction that's needed, the client can hire a private attorney. And we recommend this because evictions are very complicated processes. There's a lot of steps that you have to follow exactly. And if you don't follow those steps correctly, then the whole thing can blow up in your face and you might have to start over. People can apply for an eviction themselves with the help of the court's self-help center, and the self-help center can give information about the process and the forms, but they don't give legal advice. The forms for evictions are available online, so people can also just go online and get the forms and try to do it themselves. But sometimes an eviction can really help if it's an abusive situation and the people live together, and a move-out order and a restraining order is not either available or not appropriate. So when advising a client about a restraining order, I really try to be honest with someone about their case and try to manage expectations. Not all clients have good cases. And so it's important to let someone know if they're not likely to succeed in getting a restraining order, because that can help the person, that can influence the person's choices, essentially. And so, like I said, it's important to set reasonable expectations. And even for people who have a good case for a restraining order, I make sure that everybody knows that a win in court is not guaranteed. Just because you apply for the restraining order, it doesn't mean you're going to get the restraining order. It's also possible that someone who applies for an elder abuse restraining order, they may not get everything they want in the restraining order. So for instance, I had a client who applied for an elder abuse restraining order, and he got a restraining order. And in the restraining order, it said that the abuser had to stay a short distance away from him, couldn't abuse him, but the judge declined to grant the move out order. So the judge essentially gave the restraining order to my client, but didn't agree that the abuser should be made to move out of the home. So then my client was still stuck living in the home with this abusive person. And so it's important that people know this with the restraining order. And sometimes a restraining order is not the best option for people. Going to court is stressful and it's scary, and you have to see the abuser in court, or you might end up seeing the abuser in court if the abuser shows up at the court date. The restraining order process is hostile, and generally the abusers are not happy that someone has applied for a restraining order against them. And so this is hard for a lot of my clients who are being abused by their adult children. They don't want to apply for restraining orders against their own child, and they don't want to damage their relationship. The restraining order also might not be able to give the client what they want. For instance, if someone really just needs an eviction, then a restraining order is probably not the best option. So sometimes I'll give alternative advice aimed at keeping someone safe. It's pretty basic, but clients don't always realize that they can do these things. The first one is lock your door and also change your locks. That can go a long way in helping someone. Just giving advice not to let the other person into your home. It's very common. My clients will let their abusive children into their home, and then the abusive children won't leave, and that creates a bad situation. So just advising someone, don't let the person in. You don't have to let them in. It can help. For financial abuse, advising people not to answer calls from strange phone numbers is really important. And you can remind the client that anyone who calls can leave a message, and the senior can call them back. This might sound basic, but just advising someone to ignore the other person and stay away from them can really help. For instance, if it's a neighbor who maybe lives half a mile away, just advise your client, don't go walking past this person's house, and ignore them. And sometimes this actually does work for people. I've had clients who just telling them to stay away from the person and ignore them, it works. The other option is seeking an eviction can help. And then I always like to remind people to call 911 if they feel unsafe. And so let's talk about now enforcing a restraining order. And like I mentioned earlier, restraining orders are not always good options for people, partly because police are charged with enforcement. So the way this works is if you have a restraining order and your abuser violates the restraining order, the way to have the restraining order enforced is you call the police, and the police are supposed to come and they can arrest the person and even take the person to jail. And not all of our clients are going to be comfortable calling the police and dealing with the police. So it's important to explain to people how restraining orders are enforced. And if someone says that they're not comfortable calling the police to enforce a restraining order, then maybe a restraining order isn't the best option for that person. Restraining orders can be difficult to enforce where the parties live together. And the police have discretion when it comes to enforcement. So I see some police departments do it. My clients feel they do a great job, the police. My clients feel like they're being heard and respected. Other times I hear from clients that the police don't really do much to enforce their restraining orders. So it really varies city by city and by circumstance. For instance, if someone calls the police because the abuser has come to their home, and then by the time the police get there, the abuser has run away, the police unfortunately won't be able to do that much. It's still important that people report elder abuse to the police, because if there are enough instances, or it's important that people report violations of a restraining order to the police, because if there are enough violations, it can eventually prompt the district attorney's office to charge someone with a crime for violating the restraining order. So clients should still be advised to report violations that happen. And then if there are enough violations of a restraining order, the protected person can go to court for contempt. If they have documented the violations and made police reports, the restrained person might have to pay a fine, but this is very uncommon, and people generally don't do this. And sometimes with restraining orders, they can be really hard to enforce, and this can depend on the orders that are in the restraining order. For instance, I had a case where the judge ordered the abuser to return my client's car to my client, and the abuser they didn't want to return the car, so they didn't. And essentially, I don't know that the car was ever even returned. It was just nobody was really there to enforce that order. So enforcement can be a tricky thing sometimes, and restraining orders are not perfect solutions. So I want to end by talking about resources for survivors of elder abuse. And I know not everyone is in Contra Costa County, but in Contra Costa County, we have the Elder Abuse Prevention Project. And any of these organizations can provide services for victims of elder abuse. I'll mention too that sometimes what seniors really want, rather than a restraining order, is they want mental health treatment for their children. And so you can advise the senior to call 211 to get information about mental health treatment. There's also something called assisted outpatient treatment. It's a court-managed program for severely mentally ill people who resist treatment. So you can mention this to your clients as a possibility. And so here's my contact information. Feel free to reach out to me with questions or comments. I'm happy to talk to anyone. If you work in Contra Costa County and you know someone who's an elder who's being abused, you can have them call my office, and I'm happy to talk to them and help them. And thank you. So does anyone have questions?
Interesting.
So I wanted to share a question that someone chatted, which is if APS helps serving the restraining order, or what other agency helps to serve elder abuse restraining orders?
That is a great question. So with elder abuse restraining orders, they have to be served. The initial paperwork has to be served in person. It has to be given to the abuser. It can't be mailed or posted on the person's door. The sheriff's department in every county can serve elder abuse restraining orders for free. So this is, I think, usually a good option. You have to be able to tell the sheriff where they can find the person. So like give the sheriff an address of the person's home or workplace. But then the sheriff will go and attempt to serve the person at that address. APS does not serve restraining orders as far as I know. There are instances where you can ask a police department to serve a restraining order. For instance, if your abusive son shows up at your home, you applied for a restraining order against him, but you haven't served it, you can call the police. The police can come, and then you can ask them to serve the paperwork right then and there if they arrive, and they may be willing to do that. For service, the rules are that anyone who's 18 or older, who is not the protected person in the restraining order, so who is not the senior or dependent adult, anyone 18 or older can serve the paperwork. There are people you can hire to serve restraining orders called process servers. That can be an option as well.
And another question I had, is there a filing fee to file for an elder abuse restraining order? Does the sheriff charge the senior money to serve papers?
Also great questions. The sheriff will serve elder abuse restraining orders for free. And then there is no filing fee to apply for an elder abuse restraining order. And this is statewide, so no courts should be charging people for elder abuse restraining orders. There is a filing fee for another type of restraining order called a civil harassment restraining order. And sometimes the clerks at the courts get confused about these types of restraining orders. And sometimes they will tell you that you have to pay a fee for an elder abuse restraining order. This is wrong. And so anyone who's told they have to pay a fee for an elder abuse restraining order, if they live in Contra Costa County, they can call my office and I'll help them. If they're in a different county, then talking to a legal service provider in that county who does restraining orders can help this person. I'll mention too that domestic violence restraining orders, it's also free to apply for those, and those can also be served for free.
And Emily, I just copied and pasted 2 questions from earlier in the presentation. The first was, when there is suspected abuse in ALF or SNF, are we only required to submit report to Ombudsman or both Ombudsman and APS?
So,
And I'm not quite sure what the acronyms are. or what they
so
mean.
ALF, I'm guessing, is assisted living facility, and SNF is skilled nursing facility. I don't know for sure on whether who you're required to report to. But I will say, I think it's important to report at least to the ombudsman. Because, and then I believe the ombudsman has to share that with APS, though I could be wrong. But like I said, I'm not totally certain on this. So you should probably ask the ombudsman or APS about this.
I can speak to that if you want.
Sure, thanks.
I'm Levon Gibson, Division Manager for APS in the county. With assisted living facility or skilled nursing facility allegations, it's best to report to the ombudsman. You don't have to report to APS. You can, and we will cross-report to the ombudsman. There are situations where, a situation happens in a community and that person ends up in a skilled nursing facility, or they're discharged from the hospital to a skilled nursing facility, and we would coordinate with the ombudsman, but they are primarily responsible for facility allegations. So.
Thank you, Levon. I see another question about coercive control and the Domestic Violence Protection Act. So the domestic violence law says that coercive control is a form of domestic violence. And off the top of my head, coercive control is basically means by an abuser to coerce another individual, for instance, monitoring their cell phone, or putting a camera in their house. Anyone who's interested in this should look up online more about what this means, but this is not part of the elder abuse statute. So coercive control is not part of elder abuse. Some of the mechanisms that people use for coercive control could be elder abuse, but there's nothing in the elder abuse statute that explicitly says that coercive control constitutes elder abuse.
I had a question, Emily. Seniors have to go to the courthouse to file these, or can they be e-filed? Or what? Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yes, so I only know about Contra Costa County. Every county is going to be different, but in Contra Costa County, unfortunately, elder abuse restraining order applications have to be filed in person at the Martinez courthouse. They can't do it in any of the other courthouses. If someone's applying for a domestic violence restraining order, those can be submitted over email in Contra Costa County, but generally the elder abuse restraining orders, they have to be filed in person. And then a judge is required, if you file it in the morning in Contra Costa County between 9 and 10:30, if you file it in that window, a judge will look at your paperwork that same day and process it the same day. So it's a quick turnaround when you apply for these restraining orders.
There's a new question on the chat. You gave an example of an elder abuse restraining order that was granted with very short distance stay away order without a move out order. We have seen a few cases like this at our legal service org. Do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, so my advice to the clients in this instance would be that you should start the process to evict the abusive person from the house. If you're not able to get them kicked out with a restraining order, then an eviction is your option to get them kicked out. You can, if there's, say the abuse escalates and there's a violation of the restraining order that's very severe, and there's new abuse that happens, the senior could always apply again for a restraining order, or seek to have the restraining order modified, I should say, to add a move out order. So it is possible to modify restraining orders, and you could ask a judge to modify the existing order to add the move out order. But if there's no escalation of abuse or no new serious abuse, I would say an eviction is probably your best bet at getting the person kicked out. Yes.
I had one question. I know for intimate partner violence, sometimes victims in the case when they call the police, they may be offered an emergency protective order. Do you know if seniors are offered the same immediate stay away order? That way it gives them time to file for the elder abuse restraining order?
Yes, so emergency protective orders are something the police can grant to anyone, seniors, non-seniors, people with disabilities, and those are basically, like the name suggests, restraining orders that you can get in an emergency to protect you right away and give you time to apply for a restraining order. So I do have cases of seniors who get emergency protective orders. Emergency protective orders, there's a time limit for how long they can last. I think it's 21 days. So someone who gets an emergency protective order should use those 21 days to apply for a more permanent restraining order and get some more permanent protections in place. So I see another question. It's who can file for an elder abuse restraining order for the elders if the elders have mental health issues? So that's a good question. If the person, if the elder is conserved because maybe they have severe dementia, or for whatever reason they're conserved, then the conservator can apply for an elder abuse restraining order for the senior. If a senior has set up a power of attorney and designated, say, their adult daughter to be their agent, and given the daughter the proper authorization in the power of attorney, then the daughter could apply for a restraining order on behalf of the elder. Like I mentioned, adult protective services in some circumstances can apply for an elder abuse restraining order for an elder. But in general, if adult protective services can't do it and there's no conservator or no power of attorney or guardian, then the elder may need to have to apply for the restraining order themselves. And this is a problem for people who don't set up a power of attorney, for instance, and then get dementia, and there's nobody to help them. That's why we advise all our seniors to set up powers of attorney and put something in place to make sure that there's someone there who can help them apply for a restraining order or do other things like manage finances if the elder has issues and can't do it themselves.
All great questions. Thank you everyone for engaging and participating. We're going to send the slides pretty soon, as well as a survey, so you can let us know how we can enhance the training. And thank you so very much, Emily. So are there any other questions? Well, if you do have another question, you can definitely call our center or contact Emily. And thank you, everyone. Have a nice afternoon. Nice lunch.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.